I'm Isabella Sanchez, and today I'm going to be discussing the Baldwin Kennedy meeting. The Baldwin Kennedy meeting was an attempt to improve race relations in the United States. Robert Kennedy sought out Baldwin's advice on how to improve the relationship between the races. He was concerned with the growing desperation in the black community and saw what was happening in the South and feared that something was brewing in the North. Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in the southern United States were fully prominent, and in the South, black people were rebelling violently against the injustice, particularly in Birmingham, Alabama. The meeting took place on May 24th in 1963 in Kennedy's apartment in New York City. Along with Baldwin was a small group of black artists and intellectuals. Members of the meeting were David Baldwin, Harry Belafonte, Edwin C. Berry, Kenneth Clark, June Shagaloff, Lorraine Hansberry, Lena Horne, Clarence Benjamin Jones, Jerome Smith, and Rip Torn. Members of the meeting believed Kennedy was ignorant of the black experience and questioned the administration's commitment to racial inequality. Kennedy brought Burke Marshall, who was the Assistant Attorney General, to the meeting where they wanted to discuss how the administration was doing everything possible to help the African American community and how the Justice Department had been supporting the civil rights movement. They focused on the ways to reform the existing system through laws, unlike members of the group who felt that Kennedy was not doing enough to further the advancement of the civil rights movement, while also discussing the ingrained inequality in America. Even though the group did not reach a consensus, the meeting gave to the urgency of the racial situation and allowed for a turning point in Kennedy's attitude towards the civil rights movement. In the play Pantheon's Edge by Mark Allen Davis, which revolves around the relationship between James Baldwin and Lorraine Hansberry, and also explores the Baldwin-Kennedy meeting. In Act 2, Scene 1, which is set in the Kennedy, New York apartment, where members of the Baldwin-Kennedy meeting are discussing issues facing the black community. The play explores themes such as race, segregation, civil rights, citizenship, equal rights, oppression, and performative allyship. The scene starts out with Bobby Kennedy telling the members that he wanted to meet them all to discuss how the administration was in the process of putting together a groundbreaking legislation and its commitment to the civil rights movement. Members of the group, such as Lena Horne, state how they believe that the administration is not doing enough, while Kennedy continues to speak and explain how he cannot understand why the Negro community seems to grow angrier and more hostile. He later goes on to say, I mean, hell, I believe quite strongly that a Negro could become president within the next 40 years. And the room does not agree and does not enjoy hearing this commentary from Kennedy. Kennedy does not seem to understand why the group is upset and does not understand why they feel the urgency to push for the advancement of civil rights. The group is more worried about this than thinking years into the future of how a black man could be a president. The group wants change now, not 40 years later. James Baldwin then states, it's a very simple, actually, a Negro can't know if a church which preaches acceptance does in fact love or hate him, but he does know that a church is white and won't accept him. You keep on asking for this patience, and there's nothing in the society that is telling me that I'm wanted. I, therefore, am not part of the package that is your America. Your America, the fabric that is America. Someone with my complexion is not woven into the concepts or syntax of the country as you are trying to define it for us. This statement shows how the black community felt to be black in America and how they did not feel welcome in their own country. Kennedy wants to preach patience when the country doesn't even accept African Americans. The way African Americans deal with oppression from multiple layers is something Kennedy needs to understand, and having this meeting allows for him to get a first look glance into how African Americans feel on a day-to-day basis in America, instead of just seeing African Americans full of anger on his television screen. Kennedy then states, no matter what we do, the Negro population is listening more and more to these dangerous extremists, black Muslims, and that is causing real trouble. It makes me wonder, is Kennedy even listening to what the group has to say? He is more worried about how to control an angry Negro society and how to stop that than listening and understanding to the issues faced by the black community. Another character, Jerome Smith, who was a freedom rider and civil rights activist who had also been beaten and jailed in Mississippi, began to be angered by Bobby saying this and responding You don't have no idea what trouble is, to which Kennedy is unamused and shocked that someone is speaking to him disrespectfully. He then begins to explain to Kennedy the awful troubles he has faced in hopes of integrating the bus depots. He tells the story of how badly he was beaten and reveals how a little boy stabbed one of the other freedom riders that was with Jerome Smith and shouted, "Niggers die, niggers die." After telling the story of being beaten, he lets Kennedy know, "Nah, you ain't gotta worry about no black Muslim extremists." I think this part of the play is very important because it lets the audience know how awful the treatment of black people was. Not only are they being beaten, but how they have to deal with vicious, awful words from society. It shows how the real danger isn't these quote unquote black Muslim extremists, but the regular day to day man who fears and hates the African American population. It shows the bigger picture and how society needs to change in order for there to be equal treatment of all races. They continue to argue, and Hansberry interrupts and states, "You have a great many accomplished people in this room, Mr. Attorney General, but the only man you need to be listening to is that man," points to Jerome. Right over there, he's the voice of 22 million people. He was an example of how many people in the black community were feeling and how they were suffering at the hands of a hateful nation. This scene ends when Hansberry walks out of the room and everyone follows. This section of the play was interesting to read because it gives insight into how the Baldwin Kennedy meeting allowed for African Americans to have a voice and let Kennedy know everything wrong with the current administration. Instead of Kennedy being praised for his efforts, he was met with brilliant intellectuals and artists who let him know the harsh realities of the African American community.